Welcome. We're glad to have you joining us tonight and being a part of Wednesday Night Alive. We have an incredible crowd downtown tonight, and was Italian night a good night? Yeah. All right. It looked delicious. It really, really did. Wendy and I always say we don't eat before we come in here and speak because we don't want to go to sleep while we're talking, and so we know some of you might after a great dinner, but we will wind up having our opportunity to get a to-go box and have an Italian dinner a little later tonight. But we'll have a great time, and so if you're joining us online or if this is now time of on demand sometime later in the week, we're just glad you're choosing to join in with us and be a part of Wednesday Night Alive. We have a lot of things we're going to try to cover tonight and have a good time talking about, but why don't we bow for a word of prayer? Oh God, we're grateful for this evening to be able to come together as your children, a family of faith, to enjoy the fellowship, to laugh, to be able to eat well, to be able to have this time to come and to study your word and to study and try to learn and open our hearts to you. We pray you would lead us in our thinking, lead us in our lives, give us perspective. We pray, oh God, that you would be the one who would lead our hearts and minds. It's why we're here tonight. And we ask that you would give us the ability to think and to follow you. Amen. All right. Are you going to work the slides and click them on through?
Yes.
All right. We can click to our first one because you hear us say it all the time. You know, the mission of St. Luke's is to share God's love and bring hope in the world. Those are not just words. It really is carefully thought out what is our value and what is it we're going to do as a family of faith. This is for all of us that we say, what are we going to do? We ask every person when they join the church, will you live in such a way that you are going to share God's love and bring hope in this world? It is our value. We are going to share God's love. And we're going to be bringing hope. Jesus said, the greatest commandment is that you love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two laws depend all the law and all the prophets. I never forget that nor discount that, because we're going to talk about all kinds of laws or different things in the Bible. But if you want to say, what does it depend upon? It is the greatest commandment, Jesus said, and that's to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. If that is our plumb line, then everything else we're going to talk about and do is going to square to that. That's what we're called to be about. That's what we're called to do, and we feel that that truly is the great commandment, and it's why we're going to share God's love and bring hope in the world. Now, we do it by sharing, growing, and serving. Those are the ways that we go about doing these things and trying to share God's love and bring hope in the world. Again, by making those statements, we try to align all of our actions as well as how we spend the church's budget to accomplish those three things. How are we going to share Christ? How are we going to wind up doing that for people? It affects the way that we go out and try to win new people to Christ. We already have 159 new members this year, and we believe that we are on track for 300 at the end of 2022. That's always been our goal, to receive somewhere around 300 new members a year, and we do that year in and year out for decades now. Our attendance has been kind of fun. Right now, we just went through St. Luke's on Broadway. And what a good time that we had with St. Luke's on Broadway for the last 6 weeks. And we came out and we worshiped, and we would sing some different songs, and we decorated our sanctuaries up. But we did really well as we came through St. Luke's on Broadway. And just to give you that idea, the attendance, our attendance from 2019, and we like to go back, a lot of times you're going to hear us refer to 2019 to today. And that's because 2019 is pre-COVID. The world changed in March of 2020, and so all statistics and things kind of get fuzzy-wuzzy, what does it really mean? And you can't come, and so we're now kind of back to real and different world, actually. But so we always go back to 2019. But from 2019 to this year with St. Luke's on Broadway, we are up 55.47%, which is just, I believe they have that on there, don't they? Or they have a bunch. I wanted to see. On Broadway, we had...
Okay.
On Broadway, we have all kinds of scenes from, I hope you had a good time here, our different performers and the times that were going on, the things that we were doing, having a great time with that. Our average attendance was actually 3,628 a Sunday, and that includes our in-person and online. As I say, total was up 55.4% from 2019 to this year. So attendance has been growing incredibly well. If you had told me the thing that will help your church grow the fastest is a worldwide pandemic, I would have questioned your sanity and mine and think, you got to be kidding me. But the fascinating thing is the attendance has gone up, but so did the income. For our income, our finances wound up being up 13.4% year over year. Now that's from back in 2020 or 2021. So at this point this year, compared to last year at this point, we're up 13.49%. And from 2019, going back to the end of August, we're up 22.94%. We haven't passed an offering plate in 2.5 years. Again, I sometimes marvel at that and go, we stopped passing an offering plate and the income went up. That's kind of counterintuitive. Please, you cannot come to church. Attendance will go up.
That's how you know it's of God. When you close the doors, attendance goes up. When you don't pass the plate and money goes up, it's of God.
And I'm going to tell you what, it truly has been a time of spiritual growth for us. And so attendance and money have both been strong. That's been about how are we going to try to share Christ. We're growing in our faith, and in growing in our faith, we have all kinds of exciting things that are happening right now. We have our Wednesday Night Alive that is going on. We have all of our activities that are happening, Bible studies, all kinds during the week. We just got through with Faith Sisters on a Sunday afternoon. We're having youth in our theater and having a great time. We just had Vacation Bible School this summer. I sometimes want you to just stop and think about all the things that happen in your church, providing the opportunity for people to grow in their faith. Because that is one of the things we are so committed to having happen. Last week we just had our first Esther Women again, and with Linda Brinkworth, our own Linda, and Linda Harker, and just was a special, special time. And so, growing in faith, how are we going to do this? How are we going to serve the community? Just in the last month, the things that we were doing, our garage sale, our women of faith have done amazing. That was truly incredible this year, broke all kinds of records. Helping of Afghan families that we were doing. They were so incredibly grateful. We brought them up here, let them shop, and they were beyond thrilled. Shop for free. Then we also had our school supply drive, as we were talking on Sunday, 1,200 backpacks going out to different schools, literally all across the city, that you picked up and provided. Our food ministry, you hear about all the time. Literally the thousands of people that we are feeding every day. It's just an incredible opportunity. So we are trying to share Christ. We're trying to grow in our faith. We're trying to serve the community. All of it so that we can share God's love and bring hope in the world. Right now, during the pandemic, and now into all this talk about disaffiliation, it has been so easy, I think, for many churches to take their eye off the ball. To be focused on so many things other than truly us being the church, sharing God's love and bringing hope in the world. And I just wanted you to be able to hear that you and your church have not done that. We know our mission, we know our calling, and through the pandemic, we found all kinds of new ways to share, grow, and serve. We did it through the pandemic. We will be doing it now through this time of disaffiliation. We're not going to take our eye off the ball. I can tell you so many exciting things we have planned for this fall. Wonderful opportunities we're going to have. We are already in high gear planning for Christmas, Advent to be kicking off. You know, you start talking about that with staff and their eyes glaze over. You know, we just got through the Broadway and you're talking about Christmas, and the answer is yes. I mean, because we want it to be that special. So there's a lot of noise in the world right now going on around us, and that's what we want to talk about, is a lot of that noise and the things that are going on. But we're teaching this class because we want you to be able to say, we want you to be able to feel and to know it's really going to be okay. St. Luke's is going to keep on being St. Luke's. We're going to keep on being the church. And all these things that we've been doing to win people to Christ, and opportunities to grow in our faith, and how we're going to serve the community, what are we going to do on worship on Sunday morning, we intend to continue to let that be our number one focus in what we're about and what we are doing. And in the meantime, we will manage all of this other stuff, but that's never going to become number one for us and take all of our time and attention and focus, because that's not the calling of the church. So, I know that right now there's been lots of articles in the Daily Oklahoman. How can you not wind up seeing the things that are going on? Our friends at Church of the Servant this last week were taking a vote that was so highly publicized, and I have been in great prayer for all of them, and I think the struggles and the issues that the vote has meant for them. We have so many other churches that have been taking votes, like Asbury United Methodist Church in Tulsa, and they are leaving, and First Methodist Church in Tulsa, they will be disaffiliating. First Methodist Church in Ardmore will be leaving. There probably will be this year about 20-25 churches that will disaffiliate. We're going to be telling you all about the process. How does that happen? Why do people do it? And where are we? We're going to look at what things are happening, not only in our state, but in our nation, because lots of things are going on in Texas and Georgia and Mississippi and the Northeast. And so we're going to try to help you have a bigger perspective of what's going on in the Methodist Church in the United States, as well as then the Methodist Church in Africa and the Philippines, and how does all that play into what's going on right now, and what are people doing. We want to talk about the Global Methodist Church, the GMC. Everybody is talking and learning about the Global Methodist Church. And what is that, and why is that an alternative for some churches?
And that's not equal to disaffiliation. Disaffiliation is different than becoming a member of the Global Methodist Church. And so most of the churches you hear about in Oklahoma are disaffiliating, and then their plan is to go to the Global Methodist Church, but they're not the same. Some of the churches that are planning to disaffiliate or have already taken their vote are not planning to go to the Global Methodist Church.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's very important, because they are not one and the same. And people tend to think that the choice is go Global Methodist Church or no, we're staying UMC. And it's not a binary choice. There can be 3 or 4 different choices that churches are making and thinking about making. And so we want to look at really what's the total landscape out here, and what is happening across the United Methodist Church, and put all that into perspective. So we are going to talk about what is a Methodist, what makes a Methodist, where did our name come from, and how are we supposed to be working. We'll talk about our denominational challenges and breakdown, lack of church growth, a lack of focus on missions and evangelism. We're going to talk about the purpose of an annual conference. We'll talk about financial issues in the denomination, sometimes mismanagement and ineffectiveness. We're going to talk about human sexuality and what is scriptural and what has occurred in the UMC. We're going to be talking about what is being done to divide ministry in the church, and all of it will be wrapped in trying to discuss who is John Wesley, and how does all this come all the way back to Jesus and who he called us to be, and what does it mean to say we're going to share God's love and bring hope in the world. So we are going to cover the waterfront. I hope to be very honest with you. We're not going to shy away from anything. Our promise is to try to ask questions at the very end, and you can do online, as we're going to be doing there. So we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about, and we'll try to deal with it all. And I hope that in the end, we're all in a better place where we're going, I know what I'm thinking, I understand what's going on, and I hope, thinking, I love my church and I'm very excited about what we're going to do as we go through the fall and into next year. So, how did we get here, Wendy?
So my section, just to give you an idea of my task at hand, is to tell a brief history of the Methodist movement and give a brief history on the life of John Wesley in a few short minutes. So it will not be complete, but we've taught on this before, and if you go to our website, we have classes that we really have taken an entire Wednesday Night Live to really cover these subjects. But there are some important things that we want to cover. It does start, the Methodist movement really does start with John Wesley, but I want to go back even farther and talk about kind of our spiritual heritage beginning with Jesus. And so from Jesus, there was a time for about 1,000 years that the early church was one. And then in the year 1054, there was a split of the church from the Eastern Church, which was really the Orthodox Church and gave rise to the Orthodox Church. If you grew up in a church with Orthodox in the title, this going the way of the Eastern split is your spiritual heritage. Everybody else came out of the Western tradition, and that would be the Catholic tradition. So for the first 1,000 years, we were one church, but in 1054, we split from East and West. And then in 1534, King Henry VIII of England wanted a son, and England was Catholic. And he had his first wife, and she gave him a daughter. He wanted a male heir, and so he divorced her. And then Anne Boleyn gave him another daughter. He wasn't happy with that. And so he wanted to divorce her, and the Catholic Church said, this is too much. And so if you've seen the Broadway musical Six, or you've watched any about the Six Wives of Henry VIII on PBS or any of the documentaries, you kind of know it's a children's nursery rhyme, which tells you how macabre this is. But it's divorce, beheaded, died, divorce, beheaded, survive. So it's a charming
We taught that to our children every night before they went to bed.
It's a charming little nursery rhyme. So Henry VIII wanted a son. He wasn't allowed to get a divorce, and so Anne Boleyn was beheaded. And that meant he had to declare himself the head of the church. Now, what church was he talking about? Really, it was the Roman Catholic Church, but he was the head of the Church of England. And so it really started out pretty Catholic feeling, and then it would become more and more Protestant, and you'd go through some, different cycles depending on who was on the throne. But so for 500 years, we had been Catholic. And then in 1534, King Henry VIII started the Church of England, which that name gave way to the Anglican Church, from England to Anglican Church. And in 1784, John Wesley, after starting the Methodist movement, finally kind of christened and gave rise to the Methodist Episcopal Church in the U.S. So, and after that, it would go even more. In 1844, the Methodist Episcopal Church would split over slavery from the north to the south. In 1939, we got back after 95 years of being apart. We got back together and formed the Methodist Church. And then in 1968, the Evangelical United Brethren Church, and those were churches, especially up where I grew up in Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, merged with the Methodist Church to become the United Methodist Church. So a couple things in kind of that lineup of how we got to be where we are. You see several different kind of separations or splits. And what would happen as the church expanded, you go from Jesus to John Wesley to here today, we're United Methodist. But as the church went out into the world and expanded, as disciples went to preachers and the church expanded, a couple things happened. You have the headquarters of the church. They become more and more structured. And then, as it spread out, you would have local churches that would become more and more distant from the headquarters. And that would happen on a literal basis. They would be far away. When the Catholic Church was in England, that's quite a ways away from the home church in Rome, but also figuratively. And so you have the headquarters in Rome, and what do they know about all the nuances of the Catholic Church in England? What is happening there? And so there would be tension, and so these would give rise to a split. Another reason for some of those divides is because when you are growing, you get to a place where you have enough structure that you are a headquarter kind of church, the Roman Catholic Church. And you have kind of all your laws, and you've got it down because you've been doing this for a while, and so you become kind of complacent. And so you kind of know how to do things, and you do things the same old way, and it becomes a little dull or complacent. And so over time, you have reformers who come up and they have a different way of doing things, a different way of reaching people. And one of the things that's really common is that the big organizations really don't want to hear suggestions from the little people. Why would they? They've got it down. We've been doing this for years and years and years. Who are you? A little priest, and you have 95 ideas about the Catholic Church? For John Wesley, it was almost the same thing as Martin Luther. He had ideas for how to reform the Anglican Church, not to leave it, but to bring about reform. And again, if you've been doing this for a while, you don't want to hear the suggestions of someone down the chain in the hierarchy.
I just want to make sure you understand, I've been doing this 31 years.
And still is so vibrant and adapting and changing, always ready to meet the need. Well, the other thing I want to show you that in all of history, going back to Christ, the church has been around for about 2,000 years. Our history as United Methodists accounts for 54 years of it. So we have a far greater spiritual heritage. I am extremely proud of my connection to Methodism, but my foundation is based on the Church of God, the church that Jesus Christ built, rather than a particular denomination that I am part of. I have a higher calling. And so it's not to say one thing or another, what's right or wrong, but where is your greatest foundation and connection? For John Wesley, it would be easy to look at his life and think that his greatest attribute was being compulsive or methodical. He was methodical from birth, and he got that from his mom. And she had to be. Susanna Wesley had 19 children in a very small house, and her husband sometimes paid the bills, sometimes there would be enough food, and so she had to be very strict and disciplined. She would have an hour a week with each child to really address their spiritual welfare. Each child had an hour with her. She had it lined out. She would teach the children how to read when they were 5, because that's what you do. So she was very methodical. John Wesley grew up in that, and that's the way he lived his life. All throughout his life, that would guide him. If you read kind of his diary of how he would plan out his days hour by hour, starting at 4 a.m., you would think he is way over compulsive about these things. But it wasn't about, it was an intentionality to live life to the fullest, to not waste a single hour, to not waste money or to not waste your time. And so he was making sure that he was giving himself to the disciplines of a faith tradition. Well, he would live that way, and a special thing happened in on May 24th, 1738. It's the Aldersgate Street experience. Now, John Wesley was almost 35 years old when this happened. He had already been to the United States and basically had a failed kind of missionary experience. He had to leave town in the middle of the night because he had messed up so bad, and it was over a woman, and oh my goodness, it was a mess. So
it's a great story. You need to go read that one sometime.
Do not take relationship advice from John Wesley.
That's right.
At all. But what you can take is, as much as his life seems to be led by compulsion or being so strict and disciplined, that's not the greatest thing. He was led by yielding to God's movement in life. So when he gets to Aldersgate at 1738, I want you to hear, it's about 9 o'clock in the evening. And so after probably getting up at 4 a.m., he probably is tired. I want you to hear how he describes it. And some of you have heard this many times, but it's worth hearing again. In the evening, I went very unwillingly to a society in Aldersgate Street where one was reading Martin Luther, preface to the epistle to the Romans. So basically, this is Martin Luther kind of what he was writing to introduce the book of Romans in the scripture. About 9:15, while he was describing the change which God works in the heart through faith in Christ, I felt my heart strangely warmed. I felt I did trust in Christ alone for salvation, and an assurance was given me that he had taken away my sins, even mine, and saved me from the law of sin and death. Now, some would point to this moment, well, that's the moment John Wesley was saved. And I'm like, I don't think so. I think it's the moment that he understood assurance, that he got it, that he had been doing all the right things, and then in that moment, it clicked. Now, some of you have a faith story where you can go back, and I was saved on March 10th of this year, and this is what happened. And then some of you are going to have a story like mine. It's like, well, I kind of was raised in the church, and I can't really remember a moment that I wasn't in church and I didn't love Jesus. I mean, I always kind of grew up that way, so it's not as dramatic. So for John Wesley, who had always grown up in the life of the church, always doing the practices of God, this is his moment where it clicks. Now, what happens when you have a moment like that, when everything comes together and he gets it? It's not enough when you read scripture and you've read it enough and you've gone to worship enough and you've served others, it all comes together, and he knows he's not doing these things to earn salvation or earn God's love. He's doing it because this is what Christian life is all about. And so now he gets it. He wants to share it with others, and he wants to take that into the Anglican Church. Again, the Anglican Church kind of has it down. And so they're not super excited about a new way of doing things. So he begins this on his own and with other teachers, and so he starts to develop classes and groups to help these people grow in their faith. Initially, the Church of England is able to kind of overlook it. But what starts to happen is that this becomes a movement, and hundreds of people and thousands start to become a part of this. And it irritates the Anglican Church because they aren't seeing those kind of results, and it's doing it in a different way. In 1738, he had his kind of Aldersgate experience. The very next year, his close friend, George Whitefield, another pastor, encouraged him to go out and preach outside especially in Bristol, to the miners and to the people who were kind of the lowest in that socioeconomic kind of situation. And remember, he's very methodical, and he was like very unwilling, because that's not where you preach. An Anglican priest has a preaching gown, so you have to look a certain way, and you preach in the church on a pulpit that was higher than this, where everybody could see you in the church in a worship setting. But remember, as methodical and as compulsive as he was, he also yielded to the work of God. And when he saw what George Whitefield's preaching to the miners did, he understood that although this was his comfort zone, this was where God was working in the world. And so again, he yielded to that and followed that. As it continued to expand in England, and then people started going to America, there came a problem when Anglican priests, English Anglican priests, were leaving the United States. Why? Because the War of Independence. And so we were fighting against England. And so English priests felt really uncomfortable in the United States at that time. And so many were coming back, and that left many, and they weren't a different church yet. They were called Anglican Methodists. That left them in the United States without the ability to receive the sacraments of baptism and communion. And so John Wesley, one of the things he did, he was trying to be a good Anglican. He wrote to his bishop and asked him to ordain some of these lay pastors so that they could go to the United States and serve communion in these societies. This is what he wrote, because the bishop turned him down. He was wanting to ask if John Hoskins could be ordained, and the bishop turned him down, and so John Wesley wrote, "He asked the favor of your lordship to ordain him, that he might minister to a little flock in America. But your lordship did not see good to ordain him. But your lordship did see good to ordain and send into America other persons who knew something of Greek and Latin, but who knew no more of saving souls than of catching whales." So you can see he's starting to kind of turn and really frustrated with the church. He ordains a couple lay pastors, and Thomas Coke, who is a famous United Methodist, especially in the missions world. Thomas Coke was a faithful Anglican priest, but he started following the teachings of Wesley, and so he was kicked out of the Anglican church. John Wesley would ordain him and kind of consecrate him as the first bishop, sent him to the U.S., and we have a picture of Barrett's chapel. So in November of 1784, in this chapel in Delaware, they had the first time to serve communion and perform baptisms without it being an Anglican priest. So this was kind of their independence movement. And then just a month later at Lovely Lane Chapel on Christmas, they called all the pastors together for an annual conference. And I thought, that was a lovely thing to do then. I don't know that I ever want to have an annual conference over Christmas. But at Lovely Lane Church in Baltimore on Christmas Eve, we had an annual conference, and the Methodist Episcopal Church was brought into being. And then there's a picture of Bishop Thomas Coke ordaining and consecrating Francis Asbury as a bishop. So we would have these two bishops to serve there. And I believe there's another picture of a modern consecration of a bishop. So we still do things the same old way. And there's some wonderful aspects of that. I think that's Bishop Saines, Reuben Saines.
I think so.
It's hard to know all your bishops by the back of their hairstyle, but you can see between the two pictures, this is kind of how we do it. There's a laying on of hands, and it's a very sacred moment. Now, Wesley never intended to start a new denomination, but the circumstances, he just was so full of what he had experienced, and he was very good at organization and his leadership, and this movement grew, so that by the time of his death, there were 71,668 British Methodists and 19 missionaries and 294 British Methodist pastors, and there were another 43,000 American Methodists with 198 preachers. And that's just in his lifespan. And so all of this came from his desire to yield to God's movement in the world and respond to that.
It is fascinating. I just hope you even heard that first of all, the American Methodist Church got started before the British Methodist Church. John Wesley would die an Anglican priest. He did not leave the Anglican Church. And so the British Methodist Church would start after the American Methodist Church. So kind of fun. And so we got to get a structure. And I'm going to give you this structure in about this much time because it's this exciting. But you need to understand a little bit of what's going on because we're going to go through this for 7 weeks. And when we're going to talk about general conference and an annual conference and what is all that stuff. The Methodist Church, if it's getting organized, think about it, 1784, that's when another thing was getting organized. That was the United States and our government. And so what would they do? They would create a structure for a Methodist church, for a church, right along kind of what is going to look like for the United States. We've got a picture on that one.
Yes.
So what you're going to wind up having here is you're going to have legislative. Well, that's going to wind up being the General Conference, and we're going to talk about General Conference. There come once every 4 years, St. Luke's would elect delegates to go to annual conference. We'll talk about an annual conference. An annual conference will elect delegates who then are going to go to the worldwide gathering once every 4 years. About 800 to 1,000 delegates is what it has been, and they would all come together and they would be this legislative body to determine what are Methodists going to believe and how are we going to act. It's called the Book of Discipline. In 1784 is about this thick. Today it's about this thick. I mean, it's kind of like the Torah. We started off with 10 easy laws, and then we had to kind of keep expanding. Well, that's what we've done with the discipline. But that's the only place that you can have the law set, and the only person who can speak for truly the Methodist Church with law is a general conference. And it happens once every 4 years. There's several of us here who've had the privilege of serving there. David Sevier and Brian Bakeman and myself. And get with us sometime, we'll tell you what it's really like serving at General Conference. So then you had the Judicial Council. Well, that's the Supreme Court. We were setting it up here in the United States. You got to have legislative body. You got to have a Supreme Court to make decisions. We have a Judicial Council. And so I can tell you I've been there as a delegate to General Conference, and we worked to create legislation, and we're going to change this and change that, and it gets all passed, and the whole body votes on it, and someone says, I appeal to the Judicial Council. It goes to the Supreme Court, and they say it's unconstitutional, and they throw the whole thing out, and 2 weeks' worth of work means zero. Talk about frustrating. So we have a Judicial Council, our Supreme Court, who gets to rule on all the other things we do. The executive branch, well, that's the Council of Bishops, and so the bishops all get together, but we don't have a pope, we don't have a CEO, there is no one bishop that can speak for all of the Methodist Church. We'll elect a president of the Council of Bishops who will speak, but they can't make law. They can't do it. We look to them, but they can't make law. That happens only at General Conference. So we really established a church structure, just like the United States of America. Okay? Our next one, we have so you got general conference, you got a jurisdictional conference, central conferences. Our jurisdictional conference, we have different jurisdictions here in the United States. Why don't you go to that and we'll come back to this one. We have different jurisdictions here in the United States. Our nation is broken up and you can see the different colors. We're in the South Central jurisdiction. And again, those delegates who are elected will get together and they go elect a bishop. So there's a jurisdictional conference and you elect bishops on the West Coast, middle of the country, Northeast, Southeast, from your area, and that's how it happens. It's an election. And that's how a person gets elevated to be a bishop. Now a bishop, in their own annual conference, has a whole lot of power. Together in the Council of Bishops, it's not so much, but boy, on the annual conference, they do. And I want you to just stop for one moment. Let's go back to that, Brent, for just a second. One of the things you need to understand, the Methodist Church is across our nation. When you look at that and you look out here at Cal, Nevada, California, and you look down over there, Georgia, Florida. If we were to hold a national election right now, what do you think it's going to be like? We are so divided as a nation. Well, the delegates that are going to come to General Conference will be elected from Florida and Georgia and California. Why would you expect us to get together and suddenly we totally abandon all of the thoughts from our own local areas? So the General Conference and United Methodist Church is simply a microcosm of America. And what you see play out in American politics is what you see play out right now in the church. We are that kind of divided because we are a nationwide church. Now, we're also going to talk about the fact that in all of this area, the Methodist Church is declining. And we're going to look at that. We're going to call it as it is, and I'm going to show you the decline that we are in across America. The one place where the Methodist Church is growing rapidly, Africa. Africa is growing rapidly. And the Philippines. So we're going to look at the nuances of what does this all mean when you elect delegates to come to General Conference, because Africa will elect delegates to come to General Conference. And so will the Philippines, as well as the United States. And so now we don't only deal with the division that we have as a country in our national politics, now you're going to throw in, well, what do the people of Africa think and feel? And they will have a different set of values on many things than we would in the United States.
One of the things that I remember is I was not a delegate, but it was the annual conference vote, and 2 delegates from Africa got up and asked to switch one of the annual conference boundary lines. And we wouldn't know all of the ramifications of that. And in Africa, as you can guess, there are places where there is incredible turmoil and strife. And so the annual conference voted on that, and yet General Conference voted on that without any kind of knowledge of what that could possibly do. So it's that kind of thing that just one quick little vote, you don't know what could happen.
So it is a struggle when you start looking at what we actually have here, and that's going to affect so many things that we're going to be looking at down the line. So you've got this jurisdictional conference, then you're going to come to an annual conference. Annual conference for us is the state of Oklahoma. Down in Texas, you have 5 different annual conferences because the state is so big. You used to have a conference in Nebraska and a conference in Kansas. Because we've been shrinking, you now have the Kansas-Nebraska conference. Wouldn't you like to be the bishop to cover that much territory? So that's what we're having happen, bishops trying to cover these different territories. We have one bishop for the state of Oklahoma who also takes care of, and we'll learn about, the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. There's a separate conference, the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. In an annual conference, you have a district, and we are a part of what's called the Heartland District. It's a smaller area so that you can have a district superintendent oversee your area, and he's called the DS. We'll refer to the DS. And you can see we're Heartland. That's right here in Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City is Crossroads and Heartland. And so we will get together as a group of, 40 or 50 pastors, and we'll talk about things, and we go through our DS, who sits on the cabinet with the bishop. So you got the bishop, and you got his 8 different district superintendents, and there is a lot of power in those 2 places. So you got a district, and then you have the local church, which winds up being us in the Heartland District of the Oklahoma Annual Conference, a part of the South Central Jurisdiction, a part of the General Conference of the Worldwide Methodist Church.
See, that was exciting.
So I'm just going to throw this out here to you because we have to get a few terms and then we're going to go to questions. But it's just a fascinating thought of what happens, I think, in any organization. Does the structure exist to support the local church, the district, the conference, the general conference? Does it exist to support the local church, or do we get to a point where we begin to think the local church exists to support the structure? And I'm going to try to help answer that question for you over these next 7 weeks.
Well, for terminology,
this gets even more exciting.
make sure you take one of these sheets. So the terms on the first page really are some of the ones that we've already mentioned. And then paragraph 2553, we're not going to really mention that tonight. We'll get more into that. This is the paragraph that really, it was generated at the specially called annual conference, or specially called General Conference in 2019, and it deals with disaffiliation. But these are some basic terms that you can take with you, and we can start with questions.
Okay. One quick thing about that 2553, if you wonder why is all this suddenly happening right now, because in 2019, when I was a delegate at that General Conference, and we passed this paragraph will sunset in December 31st, 2023. And right now, a Methodist church can leave if they do certain things, and they're out of the trust clause. The trust clause means, as you'll read through there, you have to buy your church building. Well, the trust clause can be escaped until December 2023. And then it goes back into effect. So why are you suddenly seeing all this impetus with churches? It's because if they want to leave, you have a window, and the window's going to close. So that's why this is happening. Just want you to understand, that's what the impetus is and why it's not suddenly dragging out for an extended period of time, because paragraph 2523 is going to go away December of 23. Okay. Just wanted to read you a quote. You got a quote, and then we'll move on to questions. A bishop in the Methodist Church was reflecting on the church, and the bishop said, "Our sickness is more serious than we first suspected. We're in trouble. You and I, United Methodist Church, we thought we were just drifting like a sailboat on a dreamy day. Instead, we're wasting away like a leukemia victim with the blood transfusions no longer work. We were once a Wesleyan revival full of enthusiasm, fired by the Spirit, running the race set before us like a sprinter trying to win a prize. The world was our parish. We were determined to publish glad tidings in the full light of the sun. Our Wesleyan-inspired dream and directive was to spread scriptural holiness across the continent. Circuit riders raced over hill and valley. New churches were established in every hamlet. Our missionaries encircled the globe. Now we are tired, listless, fueled only by the nostalgia of former days, walking with drooped eyes on the ground, discouraged, putting one foot ahead of the other like a tired old man who remembers but who can no longer perform. We sing for 1,000 tongues to sing as if it were an anthem instead of a testimony. We celebrated bicentennial as if our future were behind us."
I have a quote from a book written by Lyle Schaller. "The denomination needs to realize that it is losing touch with its grassroots constituency more and more, and that unless attention is paid to that growing breach, and a posture of responsiveness is developed at the highest levels of the church, the time will come soon when there will not be enough followers to support the visions and the agendas of the so-called leaders. Unresponsiveness leads to irrelevance. Irrelevance leads to disinterest. Disinterest breeds apathy, and apathy eventually produces a quiet and yet steady attrition like we've been seeing over the past 30 years. And how much further does it have to go before we realize that the whole structure could well collapse?
The quote that I read you from the bishop was from Bishop Richard Wilkie, and he made that statement in 1986. 1986 is when he made that statement, when he wrote a book, And Are We Yet Alive? Pointing out the struggles within the Methodist Church, and if we don't do something about it, here's what's going to happen. When he came out, he said every bishop in the Methodist Church ought to be fired if they were a part of a profit company. They would be fired for lack of production. With that kind of camaraderie, he was ostracized. They would not let him serve on many committees or do anything, and so now he was Bishop of Arkansas with nothing really to do. So he and his wife felt led by God, and they started Disciple Bible Study. How many of you have taken Disciple Bible Study? One of the greatest things the Methodist Church has come up with, and is so powerful, and it was done by the bishop who was ostracized by the Council of Bishops because they didn't like him calling them into accountability for what was actually happening. So God used him in an incredible way. That was in 1986. That many years ago, we were told we're in serious trouble. Lyle Schaller is a great church writer.
He wrote the book, The Ice Cube is Melting, and the quote he used was by Dr. Norman Neves, who started Church of the Servant, and an incredible church leader in the United Methodist Church. And he wrote that as part of Lyle Schaller's book. And the bishop at the time was livid about this. And I remember I was young in the conference, and I remember this bishop talking about this book, and I was afraid to have it with me because the bishop was that angry. And yet it's a collection of basically what Bishop Wilkie had said. What can we do? We have to do something, or else the church will not survive. That was written in 2004.
1986, we had a word. 2000, we've had the word all along, and it's gotten us to where we are today. Now, what we want to leave you with is perspective. And if you have a question, start writing it down, because we're going to pick them up, and we're going to start trying to answer whatever questions you might have, if you have a question. And if you're online, you can start texting them in, and we'll try to deal with those. But we simply wanted to give you a perspective of the Church of Jesus Christ is 2,000 years old. The Methodist Church is 238 years old. St. Luke's is 133 years old. The United Methodist Church is 54 years old. It's all going to be okay. St. Luke's is going to be St. Luke's. We're going to be the church that we were called to be, whatever the flag may be. And we're going to come back and talk about that. Because we are the church. And we have a calling that is a part of standing on the shoulders of the saints who go before us all the way back 2,000 years ago. And so I think it's important we're going to go through all this disaffiliation stuff that everybody's going to talk about around you and what's happening in votes. And we're going to keep on being the church. We're going to have a good time. We're going to do great things. We're going to share Christ. We're going to grow in our faith. We're going to serve the community. So even though we're going to hear a lot of unfortunate and sad things that are happening, do not lose hope. Do not lose joy. We're going to be the church, and it's all going to be okay.
We just came through a period of not being able to have church in person, not being able to pass a plate, and not knowing when that would change, and we grew and in attendance and in finances and our missions. God will continue to sustain and grow this church.
So we wanted to give you that perspective. If you have a question, why don't you hold the green card up? We'll have Susan's going to come by, John's going to come by. We'll try to grab them. Jerry, why don't you just bring me yours and I'll I'll answer it. I'm going to trust that you're a good guy to
Look at this
ask
one.
a right, reasonable question. Maybe I'm being foolish. Let's see here now. Is there currently an organization called the Global Methodist Church with existing leaders? The answer is yes. The Global Methodist Church came into being, I guess, officially, was it in May, I guess, of this year? The Global Methodist Church has been gearing up to come into existence for several years, ever since really before 2019. But 2019, at the General Conference, you now know what that term means. At the General Conference, some things were all passed, but they really wanted to do something different, okay? And so the Global Methodist Church is of, we would say, and I don't like using terms, of the right, left, and so on, but it is right, and it is more conservative, and so that is where the Global Methodist Church would be. The Global Methodist Church would be very strongly against same-sex marriages, and actually created legislation that got passed at General Conference 2019 that said if a pastor does a same-sex marriage, then they will be thrown out of the Methodist Church for a year and have no salary, and if you do it a second time, you're disbarred forever. That's now in the discipline of the United Methodist Church as of 2019. And it was put there by those who represented the Global Methodist Church. And some people felt very good about that. Some people felt very bad about that. And so that's the kind of thing that starts leading to a division because there doesn't seem to be any middle ground. United States politics, is there ever middle ground? There became no middle ground, and so you have a Global Methodist Church that has a structure so much like the United Methodist Church. They took the discipline, began to kind of rewrite a few things and make a few adjustments and changes, and so now they do exist, and a Methodist pastor can leave the United Methodist Church and go join the Global Methodist Church. As I say, some people feel very good about that. Some people do not feel good about that. So it's not that's just kind of where it exists. And is that enough for right now to kind of say where we are? Is there an additional question you're trying to push on that?
No, I don't know. I hear about the Global Methodist Church is a big organization. What are the entry fees? What are the exit fees?
Mm-hmm.
That has to be determined.
So they're going to have bishops. They do not have bishops elected yet. They do have an executive officer, and you can join, and you will have your credentials, your ordination recognized. But they're just getting up and going. There's maybe a few churches, but it really is, that part is in its infancy. It does not have a national or worldwide membership yet. That's what they're hoping for.
It thinks it will be successful, but there is the possibility it may not be.
The question, the statement was, they hope it will be successful. There's a chance it may not be, and that is absolutely right. Nobody really knows at this point. The African bishops, we'll get into this nuance one of these days, the African bishops, if you've been reading articles, just came out angry at the Global Methodist Church because even though the African bishops are very conservative, they don't want people going GMC. They want them staying UMC because UMC is what supports the African Methodist Church.
Well, and because they want to, if in their conservative views, they also want to kind of transform the beliefs. They would like people to believe like they do. And so they
We all
kind of
do.
win over.
That's right. So we'll come. This is part of the next 6 weeks. Go ahead. What's the next question, Wendy?
I'll let you work on. So I seem to remember learning that the original Oklahoma City St. Luke's cornerstone said Episcopal church. Does this relate to the Anglican ancestry of Methodism? And so you remember that the Methodist church that started in the U.S. was the Methodist Episcopal Church, and it does relate back to the John Wesley's Anglican heritage and also kind of the governance. Episcopal relates to a bishop, and so it kind of talks about the structure. And the Anglican church, largely in America, is called the Episcopal Church. So there is that connection.
You're going to have fun when we see this. St. Luke's Methodist Episcopal Church, go out on the front steps when you leave, and it says St. Luke's Methodist Church. go to the corner and the lights will be on and it says St. Luke's United Methodist Church. In our 133 years, we've been a part of 3 denominations.
We've outlived them. I was like, St. Luke's has outlived the Methodist Episcopal.
So I mean, again, I'm just trying to get you to have perspective. We're all going to be okay. So one of the questions was, and we'll see how far we can get with all these. It says, what is the current active membership of St. Luke's? And, it's somewhere right around 8,000, something of that neighborhood. Though we're trying to look at that very carefully to see about our roles. What is our online membership? And that's really a great question because that has been just exploding over these last couple of years in terms of online membership. We really haven't broken it out that way so much. I mean, if you join St. Luke's, doesn't matter if you're downtown, Edmond, wherever, you join St. Luke's. We do have Linda Harker, our Reverend Linda Harker, who reaches out to our online members and speaks with them. We have people who come. Dave Petit and Keith King were teaching a Bible study on Monday, and a lady showed up and she said, I started watching on television and then I went to online and I was watching every Sunday online. I've never been to this building before. But she had heard about it. She came to the Bible study and, being a part. Well, we have people all over the country now who watch every Sunday, who give, and, they're not going to be able to drop by anytime soon, though we've had them come up from Dallas from watching online because they wanted to come up here and be baptized and join here in person. So I don't have the answer of how many it actually is online, but I can tell you that right now we will have more worship online than we'll have in person, which is really bizarre. And that, when we count it, it doesn't count television. I mean, now you're talking tens of thousands television. We don't count television membership unless someone texts in a prayer request.
Well, if we ask for registration. If they register on television, we take that as a registration, not the numbers who watch, but usually about 80 to 100 will actually register on television, and so we will claim that.
Yes, out of the tens of thousands. Same thing on Facebook. We don't claim our Facebook, how many people worship on Facebook, unless they text and say, hello, I'm here. That's why if you're doing on Facebook, we really like to know because, did somebody actually was worshiping? And so then you tell us. And if you'll tell us you're on Facebook, we'll know, we respond. I mean, boom, we'll try to bring you right on in, but we know we'll have 1,000 plus on Facebook that, again, we don't count, that I know must have been worshiping. So it's kind of an interesting sort of thing. There's a different world on this side of COVID. And we've had to embrace that and go, how do we do the most we can to share God's love and bring hope in the world? How are we going to help share Christ and have people come to be a part and grow in their faith? We're developing literally a whole new world, online campus, and it's going to be a part of the future. There's no question about it. One last question, and this is going to be going, moving forward, do you expect the Council of Bishops to hold themselves accountable, much less their ministers/churches? And I'm assuming that is asking the question of, since the discipline says you cannot do a same-sex wedding, and if you do, then you're going to be disbarred. And of course, that is according to where you, if you can bring that slide back up at the jurisdictional conference, it just simply tells you it all depends on where you live. And so the answer is no, I do not think that the Council of Bishops will all ever agree to do anything.
Dr. Sevier, or do we have a rebuttal from the other ministers in the House?
There you go. I mean, it's the kind of thing that, no, I do not believe the Council of Bishops will all ever agree, and they will not hold each other accountable. And so you're going to live in one part of the country, and you would be held accountable to what the discipline says, and you'll live in another part of the country, and you will not be held accountable for that. And that is why the Global Methodist Church came into being, because they wanted to say, bishops, you are not holding people accountable, and so we're going to leave, so we will. And other people are saying we don't want to be held accountable. And so it's just like politics in America right now. We are that divided, and so no, I don't think that they will do that. I'm sure they will not do that. Okay, other ones that were Wendy, or we have our time?
Well, yeah, I want a little more time for this one. So
Okay, you got it. You want more time for
I'm
it?
going to hold on to the question and have time the next
And
time.
have time to be able to do that. Okay. So if you are online, I don't know if people have texted in questions at all. We're okay there? Okay, great. So we are going to have fun. We're going to talk a little bit more next time about what is a Methodist. What is our theology? What should make you different because you're embracing this family of faith? And so we will look at that, and we will look a little more at what's going on in the church and where we're actually going, and we hope to be able to deal with your questions. You can shoot them in. You can still submit them. If you're leaving tonight and you have one, you can drop it in the basket. You can email us during the week, and we'll start trying to collect these and deal with them then on the nights, because we truly do want to answer your questions, and I'll try to be honest just like I am with the Council of Bishops. So, perspective. We're a part of the Church of Jesus Christ. And yes, we have lots of things swirling around and disagreements and arguments. Right now, you're a part of a family of faith that is sharing God's love and bringing hope in the world, that is changing lives in an incredible way. And we're having a good time doing it together, whether it's our meals or our trips or our worship services. And we're going to continue to do that while we live through this period. I will offer a word of prayer, and we're out of here tonight. Thank you, O God, for your church. We thank you, O God, for your leadership down through the centuries that brings us to this day. Oh God, please give us a calm spirit in the midst of this time of turmoil, whether politically in our country, whether we are struggling within our denomination. Oh God, we know that you are the one who has brought us into being. You are the one who sustains us, and you will be the one who redeems us. We trust in you. Lead us forward now into the night with a spirit of joy, a spirit of hope, and a spirit of anticipation as we're excited about what tomorrow will bring. Amen. See you next week.